So
Okay, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, I prepared a little bit of questions.
Okay.
And basically, I want to start something because this year, somewhere, it's quite a historical year, if I may say it. It's 75 years of Nakba, and it's the first time in the history of United Nations they commemorated Nakba in the General Assembly Hall.
That's right.
I saw you there.
Yes,
Yes,
I was.
you were.
They did a clip with
Yes.
me on the United Nations. Yes.
Yes, I saw your face
Yeah,
and your
that's
lecture.
right.
Yeah, your lecture was presented there too. So I think this is really a moment. First time the international community recognized the Palestinian history, which Israel tried to erase. So maybe it has some significance. Is it the beginning of something like a path that might really pave the way to the return of Palestinian refugees?
First of all, it's a very important moment. There's no doubt. It's a bit too late and too little, but nonetheless, we should be happy that it has been done. It's very shameful that the United States and European countries decided to boycott the event because of Israeli pressure. That's impossible to understand. After all, it's a commemoration of a historical event, but shows you how strong the Israeli lobby still is. And because of all of that, I would say that it's a station in the journey. I don't think it's the beginning of something new. I think it's the continuation of something that we were all aware of. And this is that the civil society in places all over the world is beginning slowly to influence a little bit more the institutions. We saw the influence on organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. We're still not there because the most important places where policy is made that influences Palestine is in governments. And governments are not there yet. But definitely the fact that the United Nations decided to do the event and that a lot of countries did participate in it is a good sign. It just shows you, on the one hand, how much we achieved and how much there's still to be done. Because, as we know, what matters in the United Nations is not, unfortunately, not the General Assembly, but the Security Council, and America is vetoing for 75 years any attempt by the Security Council to take any meaningful resolution on Israel and Palestine.
Yes, but talking about indeed this Security Council and veto, and then the real power residing within the UN body, at least that now General Assembly's voting last year in December, that shows, we also talked about here with the lecture today, the Global South. So in General Assembly, Global South is majority. So in a way, it's somehow reflecting, maybe General Assembly is most democratic body within the United Nations, and it's way to circumvent that all the power which puts veto. So do you think that it's really like a kind of power of the Global South? There somehow it's coming up and changing the direction and influencing more than before the decision of the UN.
I hope so, because we were already in this story. In the 1970s, the Global South was represented in power, as you know, in the General Assembly, and in 1975 was able to pass a resolution that equated Zionism with racism. And in 1991, under American pressure, the General Assembly retracted from that resolution and dismissed it. So it needs to be, we have to wait and see whether the Global South is beginning to determine the agenda. But I agree with you. I think the General Assembly is far more democratic in representing the world than the Security Council, and I do agree that the majority of member states are probably with the Palestinian struggle. But it's one thing to vote in favor of commemorating the Nakba, it's another thing to agree to impose sanctions or to treat Israel as a pariah state.
It is true. So, but then as you said, it's just rather a station than the beginning of something of a new direction.
Yeah.
That's just a sign, but it's probably a little bit more than just symbolic.
Oh yes, it's more than just symbolic because it is something that people have tried to do for many years and did not succeed. So it means that this is very important that they succeed. In fact, you can judge it by the irritation of Israel.
Yes. Oh,
the Israelis were
exactly.
so much against it, it means that it is significant. But again, I would warn from putting in it too much into it. Too
You
much.
are
You
very
know?
cautious as
Yes.
a historian.
Yeah.
Of course you
Also
don't
as a
know.
historian, but also someone who is on a daily contact with people on the ground. And they are always asking people like me, if you say this is a significant moment, why is this significant moment not translated into anything on the ground? So we have to be cautious, not just as historians, but also being aware that in the end of the day, we have to ask, is this a policy that changes anything? Because we already know that Israel suffers from boycotts in many places. And Israelis are not welcome in many places because of their policies. But we do know that this is a society thing and not a government's policy. But definitely, I mean, as I say, it's a positive stop in the journey. It's a leap forward, but it's not enough.
Yes.
It's not enough, to put it this way.
So a lot more to come.
Yeah.
So actually, the work of historians and also the testimony of Palestinians who kept their memory alive after that many years. So these are still there and somehow really changing the world opinion for sure. As you say, maybe government level it's lagging behind. But to be able to change, so if there's something which happens on the international community level, changing the ground might still take years. And that's probably something, a kind of lag. And this kind of lag period, we could also see in 2004, the International Court of Justice ruled that war was illegal.
Yeah.
And I think in the meantime, it took maybe quite a long time, but I think European institutions now definitely from that moment within a few years, now they changed. Everybody agrees there's a consensus, war is illegal, and then settlement is illegal. This is really a big consensus. I couldn't have imagined that would have happened without the International Court of Justice ruling.
Yes, it is true, but I think on the other hand we have to be realistic. Let's take the most important decision of the EU, which was not to boycott Israeli goods, but to kind of define, make sure that customers know whether the goods are coming from the occupied territory. The Israelis found a way around it. They put Tel Aviv as the place of production. Everybody knows, and Israel continues to sell these goods. Somehow there is a gap between the statements of the EU and its actual work. Whenever you think, oh, good, they have decided to condemn the settlements, they have to condemn the wall, as you mentioned, you ask, okay, do they do anything to stop?
This is very important. That's something, we activists have to always question ourselves too.
It's talking comes cheap.
Yeah.
You can say,
Yeah,
I
you're
condemn
right.
the settlements. Do you stop the settlement? They don't. They don't. Do you stop the wall from being expanded? Do you force the Israelis to dismantle the wall? No, no way.
No.
And I think that either the EU leaders don't understand, or they do understand, which is worse, that there is a connection between the way that they praise Israel, and they still do, praise Israel as the only democracy, like the stupid remark by the EU
Yes.
president, EC president, that Israel bloomed the desert.
Yes.
They have to realize that this kind of praise and normalization with Israel, while condemning the occupation, cannot go hand in hand. If it goes hand in hand, it means that the Israelis are being told, you're one of us, we don't like what you do here or you do there, but we only can say that we don't like it, and that's it,
Yeah,
because you're one of
exactly.
us. I'll give you an example. If Iran or Saudi Arabia or any other country violates things that the European feels sacred about, then they don't stop at words. They do something. So I think there is, somehow politicians think they can get away with it, that they can both condemn and not do anything. And I think that the Israelis don't mind that. They really don't mind it. The people who are best at it are the Americans. I can show you that from 1967, the official position in the United States is that the settlements are illegal. That's the official position of the American State Department. Did they do anything about it? Nothing.
No.
So I'm not talking about the Trump era, where Trump changed the American policy, but look at the Biden policy. So it's an interesting situation in many ways. It's like everybody's playing a game, and the game is let's condemn Israel but allow it to continue to do what it wants. I wonder for how long one can do that, because it's such a low level of sophistication. It's so obvious. It's so cheap, so to speak, that one wonders how people get away with it. But they do.
They do,
They
up
do.
to now.
They do, yeah.
That's how we probably have to keep on pushing our government
yeah.
and human rights organizations. They always recommend the tangible action, not only by
Exactly.
words. And this is again and again said, but actually nothing is for the moment moving.
Yeah.
So that means that we activists have still a lot of work to do. You historians have a lot of work to do
We do.
to
Maybe the
extract.
interesting question is why? You also mentioned this. Why are they combining this discourse of condemning with no action? What do you think are the main factors?
It's a big question. I would add to this another question. How come that educated people, well-informed people, very intelligent people who are part of the political systems, part of the legal system, part of the moral system of Europe, can say such stupid things about Palestine? I mean, it's not just their opinions. I don't think they believe themselves in what they say. I mean, you hear in places like France and Germany, impressive people, really, intellectuals, that on any other topic you would listen to them because they're knowledgeable, they're moral, and then they open their mouths about Israel and Palestine, and they seem such idiots. Either people who don't know anything, or they're just lying, or they don't know I don't know, it doesn't matter. The difference between the level of their analysis and writing on any other part of the world compared to the writing on Israel and Palestine is incredible. It's like two different persons are writing it. And that's a huge question. Why is it happening? You're right. You know, I'm writing now a book. I actually finished it. I hope it will be published soon. on the history of Zionist lobbying in Europe and in America. And because I thought you have to go back in time to understand this kind of stupidity. Is it fear? Is someone paying them? I mean, why are they doing? There's no logical explanation for why they're doing it. So I thought that I should go back in history in order to get back to today to understand it. And it seems to me that there are so many factors here that work that the present generation of politicians and journalists and academics are already in an inertia that was created by the previous generation. It's not that they made a strategic decision to support Israel and Zionism. They made a strategic decision not to change the policy. And I begin to understand, and I'm trying to show it in the book, that if you analyze their position, it's not so much support for Israel. It's something, if I would put it in simple terms, if I would change the strategy towards Israel, Israel would say that I'm anti-Semitic. What do I need this headache? It's not that important to me, right? Nobody wants to get into such a fight with Israel. What you and I are willing to do, politicians who think about their election in 3 years are less inclined to do. Academics who think about their career are less inclined to do. Not so much because they believe that what Israel demands from them to do is correct. They just saying, what do I need it? Now the Israelis would say that I'm anti-Semitic and I have to defend myself against such accusation. It's how do we convince these people? I mean, I know it from Jeremy Corbyn, which we try to help
Yes.
him. How do we convince them that not to be afraid of being called an anti-Semite? Even he was brought down by this accusation. We said to him, don't justify yourself. He was trying, I'm not an anti-Semitic, I'm sitting with Jews, my friends are Jews, I was not meeting exactly Abu Jihad, it wasn't me, you know, all kinds of things, instead of proudly saying, that's what I suggested to him. I said to him, say proudly, I'm pro-Palestinian, because I'm anti-colonialist, because I'm anti-racist, but they're not doing that. They're not doing that. Even those who are with us among the politicians think that their role is to prove that they are not what the Israelis say they are. Instead of changing the whole conversation by saying to people, but they won't do it.
Is it not
But maybe we'll talk to them tomorrow. If we meet some politicians. We say, change the disc. Say that anyone who supports Israel is in trouble. Not anyone who condemns Israel is in trouble. How do we make people who support Israel feel bad as did politicians who supported apartheid South Africa? How do we make them feel bad? Not just in terms that we will not elect them, which is, of course is important, but condemn them morally. Not playing the game that they and you will explain that this is not about anti-Semitism. I know it's difficult, but I think that is very, very important. In some places, like in the Democratic Party, now in America, the younger generation of politicians understand that.
Yes.
That is what characterizes the new politicians in the Democratic Party. They stopped apologizing. They stopped saying, no, we are not an anti-Semite. They said, we are anti-colonialists, we are anti-racist. And we don't just oppose it in Palestine, we oppose it everywhere, even in America.
But this is very important of putting Palestine in universal context. We are not talking about just very particular, and this is what Israel exploit fully, the past of Holocaust.
Exactly.
They come up with this, and nowadays this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which made it even worse, it's completely weaponized. So basically what you're suggesting is put Palestine in a global, more universal context of anti-colonial struggle, right?
And anti-racist.
Anti-racist, yes.
Anti-racist is very
Yes.
important. Because one thing people are afraid to do Don't worry if they talk about Christian racism, Muslim racism, recently also Buddhist racism when they talk about India. But they're very worried to say Jewish racism, especially in Europe. But of course, everyone can be racist.
Yeah, of course.
Whether they're Jews, Muslims, Christians, or Buddhists. And I think that's the kind of language we should not be afraid to use. And be ready for the consequences. But the power of the consequences, I think, depends on us, not depends on them. It's not easy to do this because, for example, I know in the UK, I'm sure it's the same in Belgium as well. In the UK, if you are relatively alone in your position, and you're for example, you're a young academic who is not yet tenured, who is in a vulnerable position, and you tweet support for Palestine, you may lose your job.
Yeah, exactly, that's happening.
And it's happening,
Yes.
and you may work in a bank and just tweet to a friend of yours, I'm appalled by what Israel is doing, and the bank would sack you. And again, both the university and the bank would do it not because they would think that what you said is not correct, because they don't want the headache of being sued by these lawyers for Israel, as they're called in Britain. I'm sure they have a similar organization in Europe. And they sue you and the institution. And I think my university is probably the only one I know in Britain that, of course, we went through the same thing. They said that I'm anti-Semitic, self-hating Jew, I would be anti-Semitic. They asked the university to sack me immediately after I arrived in Britain, and they brought all this proof. And I was lucky. I had a university that said, we're sorry, this is none of your business, to the Israeli ambassador and to the pro-Zionist lobby. And that's all it took. They left them. They didn't go back to, they were surprised because nobody in Britain said to them, it's none of your business. Everybody said, yes, we're sorry, we'll talk to him, and if it doesn't work, we'll sack him. No, they said it's none of your business. This is an academia, and people are entitled to their views, and you're not going to interfere with our freedom of expression.
That's a courage.
Yeah, but what is interesting, that's all it took. They don't bother the University of Exeter anymore.
Wow. That's a
If
real
all the
victory.
universities in the world would have done it, and all these banks and corporations would do it once, they only have to do it once, they wouldn't know what to do. They are very used to the fact that if then they write a letter to a bank in Brussels, would say, you know, your employees were in the pro-Nakba the Nakba demonstration, this is anti-Semitism. They are used, and the bank would say, we'll have an inquiry commission, we'll ask the employee, we'll talk to the police, and so on. That's all they want. They want you to have the message, don't mess with us because it's not worth your while, you know? But we need some courage of all these institutions. Institutions are powerful human outfits.
Yes.
It's quite incredible to see them cower in front of Israel. It's just unbelievable. You talk to people in South Africa, the South Africa regime was never able to do this. Even at the height of apartheid, the embassy of South Africa in Belgium could not tell the University of Belgium, don't have a meeting against apartheid in South Africa. They wouldn't even think,
No.
and they were bastards. They wouldn't even think of calling the university. Here, the embassy in Brussels, if I would be invited to a proper lecture in the Department of History in the University of Brussels or something similar, immediately the Israeli embassy would call the head of the university. And then he or she will have to decide, is it worth for us or not? Ask the department, maybe you can invite someone else. I know it, I've been here 40 years in Europe. I'm experiencing it in every country. And I'm not surprised by the Israelis. I'm surprised by the reaction of the heads of very powerful institutions. We have to go deeper into this to find out and talk to these people and say, come on, have some self-dignity.
Dignity.
Some self-dignity. Don't be such a non-entity.
But then again, this fear comes from the burden of the past,
Absolutely.
which they did not clear enough. Could that be the reason why it still has such a power to dominate and really make such a fear, cause such a fear among? So that's probably because they didn't face the past sufficiently enough.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything is connected. If Belgium would have faced properly its past, its imperial past in Africa, it's the way the society here behaved during the Nazi occupation. If all these things were being faced honestly, if you are at peace with yourself, nobody can intimidate you. If you are not at peace with yourself, it's easy to... The Israelis are very good at it, and one should say. They understand exactly what worries people who were never had a closure.
Yeah.
Where is Israel most successful? In Europe, in the new, what is called the new European countries who joined the EU. What is typical to the Ukraine, Poland, Hungary? They were the worst countries during the Second World War after Germany in terms of treating the Jews. You read German documents, they said in these countries we didn't have to do much because they did it themselves. These countries definitely never dealt with their past. And I think this is something that the Israelis are exploiting. The good news is I do believe it's a matter of time, because I think there will be a younger generation in Europe where you couldn't, another one, second one, eventually there will be younger politicians who would say, I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with me, right? Maybe it was my grandfather, maybe it wasn't my grandfather, it's nothing else to do with me. I am a young European who believes in human rights and civil rights in my own society and also for the Palestinians. This is the kind of hope I think we have for the future, because this Israeli ploy of weaponizing the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, I think, will run its course. There will be a moment when it will be not relevant anymore. And the more or less racist Europe would be, the more difficult it would be for the Israelis. I think that's why they find it so difficult in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party in America has a lot of young Jews in it, and young Americans who really believe in a better world. They don't they cannot understand how this better world goes along with what Israel is doing. And unlike their parents, they're not easily intimidated.
So the change in the generation looks like the only hope. So, but
One of the hopes.
Hopefully.
Hopefully there are other things
yes.
that will make it quicker.
So then, but maybe indeed, actually talking about past, you also wrote in a book that visiting the journey into the painful past is the only way forward to achieve justice. So in that sense, this applies to Israel as well as Palestine, and also here as well, Europeans and Americans, and that still did not get rid of the past crimes are not sufficiently reflected, because I think the remnant of colonialism and racism are still there. That makes it impossible for them to face. So would there be possibility how to make them face this? Does, for instance, now more recent movement like anti-colonial, much more reflection, which indeed younger generations started this, would that have impact on the struggle of Palestine?
Yes, I think it will have an impact in the sense of making the international solidarity movement with the Palestinians more solid, more expanded, including groups that maybe were not there before. I don't think, unfortunately, I always hope that it was also influenced the younger Israeli society, but it doesn't influence them for its own reasons. But I think worldwide, yes, I think it is important because the younger generation sees rightly the connection between the way African Americans are treated in the United States and the Palestinians, how indigenous people in America and Australia and New Zealand and in Latin America are treated, how the difference, I think the Ukraine played an important role, how Europe treats differently so-called white refugees and Arab refugees. I think these things for a younger generation that has a basic sense of justice are outraging them. And therefore I hope that they will bring it into politics. The problem with the younger generation, I think that many of them, and understandably, regard politics as such an ugly profession that they don't go into politics, so they remain within civil society, and we are still with the problem of how do we influence politicians in younger people. And the younger people who choose to go to politics, you don't want them in politics because they're not. We have an issue here, which is, for the world at large. We saw it in the Arab Spring. There, the younger people did not only detest politics, they didn't even want organizations. They didn't like the idea of an organization because they said organizations have hierarchies, and hierarchies leads to corruption, and so on. So we need to find a way of getting them into positions where they make a difference, not just protesting against places which make a difference, but being part of places. And that's not easy. I know it's a big task, but one hopes to see it. You know it from the university. The people who get to the tops, until now, the people who get to the top of universities are not really the moral leaders you would have liked to see in universities. The good people are choosing not to have a proper political career in academia. They get away from it. Yes. Yeah. So this is something that will help Palestine a lot, because people like that, the good people like that, it will be obvious for them what needs to be done in Palestine. You wouldn't even have to work so hard with them on it.
So maybe just coming back to that point of facing the past, and you said that it's happening in many places in the world, but unfortunately not in Israel.
Right.
So that was one thing I also wanted to ask you. You as an Israeli historian started in 1970s and 80s and unraveling this painful history of Palestine. So how did you, it's a bit personal question and professionally too, how did you get into this history and how to investigate Nakba?
Well, it's a long journey, and I wrote a book on it called Out of the Frame, describing the journey. It doesn't happen in one day, and it doesn't happen because of one event. It's a long journey, and there's a moment where you kind of cross a river that you cannot come back to the other side again. I think it's interesting to look at, not only in my case, also in other cases, because I'm not the only one. In fact, there's a good book called Out of the Tribal Boundaries, written by an Israeli, an ex-Israeli. She immigrated, Abigail Abarbanel. She interviewed 25 Israelis who did this journey. And you see the common things, but there are also different things and common things. I think it has a lot to do with your personality to begin with, of course. It has to do with the fact that you spend time outside of Israel, so you can see things from the outside that you cannot see from the inside, because it's a very indoctrinated society. In my case, I think the fact that I was born in Haifa, which has a better relationship with the Palestinians, helps. And the fact that my profession was history led me to see things that maybe an average Israeli cannot see. Yes, we all would like to know what made us this way, because we think maybe we can produce more people like this if we knew the trick, but it doesn't work apparently like this. But all we can say is that this is a journey, and somehow there is this moment where you really understand that it takes you to a totally different way forward. But it's very difficult to analyze why. You would have expected many, many more young Israelis to be like this. I mean, because they're so connected to the world now. I mean, unlike my generation, we didn't know anything. But this one, you know, they know everything. You would have expected them to be different. But somehow the educational system in Israel succeeded in making sure that they don't. They don't. I mean, the best you can get out of them is to say, I really feel bad that I was in the West Bank and I had to go at night into a house and demolish it. I really feel bad about it, and so on. That's the best you can get, and that's a minority. That's not a majority. Namely, this position that the occupation is bad for us because it corrupts our young people, which is not good enough, of course. The occupation is bad, first of all, because of what it does to the occupied. But even that, you would have expected more people. But they go and they believe that they are defending the homeland. They dehumanize the Palestinians because that's the way they're educated, not to treat the Palestinians as human beings. So Palestinian babies are not Palestinian babies. Palestinian women are not Palestinian women, are not women. And this is very difficult to deprogram people who have been so heavily indoctrinated.
This is, in a way, a big danger that so much of indoctrination, it's the entire education system, the whole society is against you when you go against that stream. That you are dissent, basically.
Yeah.
And those, indeed, 75 years, as several generations are educated in this way, dehumanizing other human beings, that it's not only the victim, but the perpetrators get also dehumanized.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. It's a sick nation.
Yeah,
Israel is a sick nation because of that. It cannot be but a sick nation. And it's bad for the Jews as it is bad for the Palestinians. I mean, different way, of course. As a good friend of mine used to say, Zionism is, actually Edward Said also said it, Zionism is bad news both for Palestinians and Israelis. And I think it's true. Of course, the Palestinians are the ones who suffer more, but yeah, I agree. But I think that's why what we are seeing inside Israel today. Israel is going to be controlled by a messianic group of people, and not only Palestinians would suffer from this. Also, those Israelis who think that they are liberals and secular are going also to be victims of this messianic group. That's why there are demonstrating now in large number in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They hope to prevent the turning of Israel into a messianic, fanatic state. I don't think they will succeed. They think they're very powerful because they are the elite. They are the elite of the army. They are the elite of the high tech. So they believe that they would force this other side to surrender. But when you deal with messianic, we know it from places like Iran and other places. When you deal with messianic people who believe that God has sent them, and actually God wants them to destroy everything before building a new reality. We had it with fanatic communists, we had it with fanatic Islamists, we have now fanatic Jews. This is something, you don't defeat them by negotiation and compromises. No. And the Israelis somehow don't know what to do with this. this is good news for the Palestinians. The bad news is that these fanatics, before they will collapse, of course, can do even more damage than the previous governments. But I think we are witnessing the last chapter of Zionism. I'm totally convinced about it. We are witnessing the last chapter of Zionism. I don't know how long it will take, but I think we are beginning to see the end of this project. It's not working. It's not working, and it will take time for the world to understand it's not working, but it's on the way down in history. I feel bad. I mean, this is my family, this is my people. I would have loved them not to end like this in terms of, because I don't think the end would be nice. I don't think the end of Zionism would be nice. But it's up to them. If they want to avoid them, they can. Avoid it, they can, but I don't see them do this.
What makes you so sure? You sound very optimistic and convinced.
Because I live there most of the time, and I can see the cracks in the wall. I can see the impossibility of creating solidarity anymore. I see the growing gap between those who have and those who haven't. I see the impossible way of creating a joint society. The only consensus is around the Palestinians. And this consensus is not strong enough to build a society. So I think that there are many, many signs in the nature of the politicians, in what's happening in Israeli academia, in the huge emigration outside of Israel of the best Israel can offer to itself. I mean, the people at first, the people who used to leave Israel were the people who were poor, who could not make it and hoped to make more money in Europe or America. The people who are now leaving Israel are the elite. Many of them are in Brussels. Every day you hear of another one coming. I just met someone who said to me, now also my parents are coming. You know, because they see no future in Israel. A certain very important group for Israel that both protect it militarily, economically, but also diplomatically, is beginning to have doubts whether to stay or not. And because they are so gifted and qualified, they don't have to stay. They are not life seekers from a poor country. These are people that would be welcomed. I'm not saying it because I like it, but because this is the world, right? They would be welcomed. High-tech people would not be welcomed in any... people who are financial wizards would not be welcomed. You know, these people would be welcomed, and many of them understand it. Berlin has 40,000 Israelis in it. Remember, the Israelis, it's all in all 8 million people, so 40,000 in one city in Europe, it's a huge number. So I think that this is something, I wish the Israelis would stop and understand that there is an alternative. I'm not saying it has to go like this. I think they have to change their ideology. Accept that this is Palestine. Accept that the Palestinians are people you can live with. Accept that the Palestinians are wanting you to stay because they want to build something with you together. But you have to change this idea that this is wrong, you know, but it's very difficult to see them. I see, unfortunately, I see more a scenario of them going all the way to the end rather than a scenario where they stop for a moment and say, you know what, we can build a different reality. I always hope for the second, but I'm always afraid of the first.
But if the international pressure mounts and strong enough to make them realize, that be also...
Yeah, that's our hope.
Yes.
Yeah. International pressure can do it, definitely. But it's not easy to get this international pressure.
No, it's not easy for...
Even the Arab states are normalizing relationship with Israel.
But actually, so I think we talked about the commemoration of Nakba 75, but it's not only this, there are several, maybe a little bit sign, like international community is somehow moving ahead. Like at least something like now the General Assembly again requested International Court of Justice opinion about apartheid.
Yeah.
This could that bring maybe a next step? So you just said international humanitarian law itself doesn't bring solution, but the ICJ would rule that this is apartheid, there are consequences. That means the other member states have to take action. That's their duty. So,
yeah, but don't rely on it. The moment this will happen, the German Bundestag will pass a resolution that it doesn't recognize the ICJ. The American Senate would pass a similar resolution. It's not that difficult. I think that, I know we don't like it, but the power, until we change the world, the power doesn't lie in the United Nations or the International Court of Justice. The power lies at the capitals of the states. I think all of us as activists have an aversion to work with governments. We have very low opinion on governments, but we have to try and work with them because that's where power lies. I mean, if in Germany you cannot have a demonstration commemorating the Nakba, it's much worse than the United Nations commemorating it. I mean, that's where the fight is in these countries. And also we should ask, the Global South to do more.
yes.
To do much more. It can do much more. And not just as members of the United Nations, but each state can do much more.
You mean imposing sanctions?
Imposing
and
sanctions,
embargo.
sending a clear message
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
Israelis and so on. Yeah, so there needs a lot to be done there. Yeah. But it's good that luckily civil society is with us, but it's not enough. I don't think.
No, it's not enough. We should keep on pushing.
So how would you look at all the development cooperation that's created by states like Belgium, for example, doing projects, building some schools in Gaza, doing whatever types of projects like so many countries do? What's your vision on that? Is that a thing that is in the end sustaining the actual situation, or would you consider it that it's still something that's enforcing the capacities of Palestinians?
Yeah, Israel has put these governments in an impossible position. Of course, it's nice to give money for a kindergarten and a school, and it's good. I remember how much Spain invested in Gaza, and then Israel destroyed everything that Spain has built. The Europeans have helped to build an ecological school, and Israel destroyed it. I think one should continue, of course, and hand over this humanitarian help, but humanitarian help that doesn't have a political clout is playing into the hands of the Israelis, yes, it's good that it's happening, but it doesn't do the trick, so to speak, beyond that. It's like you ask yourself, why did the Dutch government buy a week ago with 300 million euros? It paid 300 million euros to the Israeli military industry and bought missiles from Israel. First of all, of course, you ask yourself, why does Netherlands need to buy? Against whom exactly? Against whom are they going to send these missiles? 300 million euros, I'm sure there's a lot to be done in the Netherlands with 300 million euros. But it's more than just, of course, this is a question for the Dutch to ask, do you really need missiles? But the second question is that what does it do to Israel? It's kind of, Israeli said, okay, even if the Dutch, let's say that there is a more progressive government in The Hague, and they pass a more, an unpleasant resolution. What does it matter? Because the Ministry of Defense tomorrow would buy more weapons for the poor nation of the Netherlands that needs to defend itself from Belgium, maybe, or Luxembourg, I don't know, who they're afraid would invade them, who would invade them. So yeah, I think this is something that we have to take into account as well. Yeah.
So basically, their technological asset is also one of the very important pillars why the powerful countries regard them as allies, an important strategic partner.
Yes. However, this is not the best news for Israel, because Zionism and Israel is built on two pillars. One is a moral pillar and one is a material pillar. Material pillar will always be there. Always will be people who would buy weapons from Israel, high tech. But Israelis, at least half of the Israeli Jews, would not want to live in a state that the only reason that people in Brussels like it is because they sell weapons. Half of these are the Israelis who demonstrate now. These Israelis want to believe that they are also regarded as a democratic nation, a civilized nation, that they live in a place which is democratic and civilized. Of course, they don't live in democratic and civilized, but they elude themselves that they are. And it's very clear for them that if the world would send a message, yes, we, like in Saudi Arabia, you have something to sell, so we're buying from you. But we would not recommend you to our people as a moral place. We would not talk to you about you very nicely when it comes to human rights and civil rights and so on. I think apart from these Messianic Jews who are now controlling Israel, the rest of the Israeli Jewish society would find it very difficult to live in such an Israel. And would leave. As I say, they have options. Maybe.
So this moral pillar, and that's how they call themselves most moral army in the world.
That's right.
And in spite of, indeed, against all odds, the whole world knows their behavior. They know they're attacking unarmed people, even the protesters, how they bombed Gaza, war crimes. How this apparent contradiction can exist in their mind and they could still call themselves moral?
Yeah, because first of all, the world for them is the political elites. And the political elites don't send them the message that what they do is terrible. These political elites, some of them doing terrible things themselves. So, so far they had this image that because of anti-Semitism, the civil society is against them, not because of what they are doing. That's how they justify it for themselves. But I think they understand that if this Messianic group is going to take over Israel, even they would not be able to justify what is going on. So this is why they are in such a trouble. They kind of manage to lie to themselves and maybe deceive quite a lot of people in the world that, yes, we are occupying, we are apartheid here, apartheid there, but it's, a special case because of Palestinian terrorism and the situation we found ourselves, and we're still working to make it better, kind of creating this kind of impression that worked for many years. But it's not working anymore. For them themselves, So interesting to see how they deal with it, especially how the world is dealing, especially how Jewish communities. Jewish communities always bought into this idea that yes, Israel is doing bad things, but it's because of the Palestinians, and if there will be one day there will be peace, and all these bad things will disappear. I wonder how many of them are now still convincing themselves that this is the situation, especially among the younger generation of Jews. I think everyone who was traditionally supportive of Israel has now a real dilemma, and will have even unfortunately for us, because it means more suffering for the Palestinians, would have even a larger moral agenda.
So this moral pillar that they have this, they are probably deceiving themselves, and with that conviction they can also deceive the others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they lose capacity to face human suffering because they dehumanize them so much? They humanize their so-called enemy, calling them terrorists. But this word like terrorist, which is completely absurd to be applied to the people who are occupied, because they have normally right to resist. So according to international law, they are the resistance fighters. Would that make any sense? Well, UN has a terrorist list. I think none of the Palestinian resistance groups are there.
I'm not sure.
I checked it. EU and US have them.
EU has the Hamas.
Yeah, EU has Hamas, PFLP, also Hezbollah.
So it has.
Yes.
These are Palestinian groups.
Yes, but the UN doesn't have.
Ah, okay.
So EU has, EU and US have. So that's basically political tool that they keep them in the list.
I think the list of the EU is now more important than the list of the UN. For the time being, unfortunately.
It is, but couldn't we do something about it? I think
Yeah,
Hamas went
of course.
3 times to have themselves removed.
We should challenge it. We should
Yes.
challenge it again and again and again, of course. Of course. No, definitely. Definitely we should challenge it. Be aware of it, but challenge it. I totally agree. But yes, I think that still nobody in the mainstream media in Europe would ever, in the short term, treat the Palestinian resistance with the same respect that it treats the Ukrainian resistance. Unfortunately.
Again, the entire perception has to change.
Yeah, exactly.
The frame,
Absolutely.
yes.
And at the same time, relating to that, how do you look at the evolution of what is today the Palestinian Authority, which is technically a partner of countries like Belgium, whereas it's also known that there's corruption, not to mention human rights violations from their end very publicly. How do you see their role, and maybe Palestinians' role more in general? Earlier on, you said you meet a lot of activists, and there's a lot of they haven't given up. How do you say it? They haven't been defeated in that aspect. Yet I meet a lot of Palestinians that feel very defeated, that have become, let's say, lost all hope.
No, definitely. Those talking about those who fight, definitely Israel wants every Palestinian to feel like this. And the fact that they are fighting means that not all the Palestinians feel defeated, otherwise Israel would have it easy. The PA is a problem. It's like the Palestinian members of the Israeli Knesset are a problem. There are all kinds of institutions that one has to be careful before you calling for their disappearance. You have to ask what will come instead of them. And as long as nobody has built an alternative, it's difficult to see how it's going to work. I don't think anyone eludes themselves in Palestine, the role the PA is playing in the post-Oslo reality. On the other hand, nobody has come up yet with a clear alternative. You need an alternative to make things better. You need an alternative for the representation of Palestinians in the Israeli parliament. But that's up to the Palestinians. I mean, nobody can do it instead. They have to decide. They have to decide. Do they want to create a new PLO that represents all the Palestinians once more and say to the world and the Israelis, you are now dealing with us. This is our demands. Or to go into the old PLO and change it, but it's all up to them. So nobody can do it for them.
So all what we could do is just support that the Palestinians struggle from outside and try to pressure the powers.
Solidarity movement doesn't make strategic decision for those you're in solidarity with. You ask them what they need from you, and you provide it.
To create actually the world where human rights would be the guiding principle instead of the geopolitical interest.
Exactly. And this is good for the world as a whole, not just for Palestine.
Yes, exactly.
Not just for Palestine. Good.
So,
I'm exhausted.